TRC is just one component of a holistic approach to addressing the legacy of the Indian residential schools under the agreement. It's unique and different from other commissions for the following reasons. If any of you heard Justice Sinclair speak not too long ago, he identified these, the uniqueness of the TRC. It is the only TRC where its scope is primarily centered upon the mistreatment of children. Its research focus spans more than 100 years. This is the longest research span of years in any Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It's a court-ordered commission. So it wasn't the government that decided we're going to have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It was the parties that came to an agreement on this, and it's court-ordered under the settlement agreement. And if there's issues, then the court is still there to monitor the implementation of the settlement agreement. This is also, Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission is also unique compared to other commissions because it came after an apology, and reparation for harms done preceded it, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And these are our commissioners for the Truth and These are the three individuals that are charged with implementing the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. You'll see it's Honorable Justice Murray Sinclair. He's a justice from Manitoba and a very esteemed and highly well-known member of the Aboriginal community. We have Marie Wilson, who's from up in northern Canada, and Chief Wilton Littlechild. They're the three commissioners that are in charge of making sure that we do what we're supposed to do under the settlement agreement. These three commissioners are guided by our Survivors Committee, and the Survivors Committee is mandated in the TRC settlement agreement, which is actually a schedule to, the TRC mandate is a schedule to the settlement agreement. And it says that we have to have a Survivors Committee, and it sets out the role of the Survivors Committee. And so all the work that we do at the TRC is guided by this committee. Indian residential schools are a part of Canada's shared history, a history that is not well understood by many. I say this to, I live in Toronto, I went to law school, I have lots of friends that are lawyers, I read the Globe and Mail, I sit around other people that read the Globe and Mail, and I can't tell you how many times when I tell people I'm going to work at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the look of, I don't know what you're talking about. We did do a benchmark survey at the beginning of the TRC process, and it indicated and showed that Canadians in general are not aware of Indian residential schools, and they're not aware of the settlement agreement, and they're not aware of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And that's a problem for us, and we're working on that at the Commission, on our outreach and on educating all Canadians about this history, this shared history that we have. Now, the TRC, to lay the foundation for reconciliation, their job and our job, my job, is to educate Canadians as to why this history is important. We will understand how we arrived at this moment in time and how we can move forward together in the future. We can't have reconciliation with ourselves. Aboriginal people can't have reconciliation with ourselves. When I think of reconciliation, I think about equity, I think about respectful relationships, and I think about the wampum belt in my culture, where we walk together side by side. And we can't have that reconciliation if all Canadians don't come forward and work towards that. The Commission has a 5-year mandate, and this is the task that we have to do in 5 years with very little money. We are tasked to create an accurate and public historical record of the past regarding the policies and operations of the former residential schools. What happened to these children, who attended the schools, and what former employees recall from their experiences. Keep in mind, we're not gathering just statements from survivors. the children and the students. We want to gather statements from the people that worked in those schools. We know there were some good people in those schools that resisted. We know that they tried to stop what was happening in those schools and writing to Ottawa and trying to get people to change what was going on. So we want to get as many statements we can from our survivors, from the children of the survivors, from the people that worked in the schools, from anybody in Canada that knows anything about the Indian residential schools. We want to speak to the RCMP officers that helped apprehend the children and take them into the schools. And we want to speak to the families of those people that worked in the schools and the families of those people that were working for the RCMP. It's our job to complete a public record that will include recommendations to all parties of the settlement. We have to host 7, and I don't know how the lawyers came up with 7, but they came up with 7 national gatherings or events in regions across Canada. And those events are to promote awareness and public education about the legacy and impact of Indian residential schools. Our first national event is on June 16th, just around the corner. And it's in Winnipeg, which is not just around the corner. And we invite everybody to attend. It's at the Forks in Winnipeg. And it really is, if you go to our website, the agenda's on the website. It's a 4-day event. It's a celebration of Aboriginal culture. It's an academic conference. It's statement gathering. We're having public statement gathering. We're having private statement gathering. We have Blue Rodeo. It's a big event, and there'll be 6 more of these across Canada. And it's hopeful that we'll have a good turnout for the first event. We're also tasked with supporting commemoration initiatives that will, we will fund projects that pay tribute to survivors, and there'll be a commemoration initiative policy that will be implemented on the website shortly. We're also tasked with supporting community events, and those events are to be designed by the community. And if you go to the website, there's information on community events and how you and your community, and that's not just Aboriginal communities. You know, I'm looking at you in Toronto. You can do a community event. You can put a proposal in about what efforts you will make towards reconciliation in the City of Toronto. We also have to establish a national research centre that will be a permanent resource for all Canadians. So in that National Research Centre, all the statements that are gathered will be put into the research centre, and people will have access to those. All the records that we gather from the churches and the government will also be part of the National Research Centre. So it'll be a great resource for people wanting to learn about their family, for researchers if they want to write further research papers on the history of residential schools. And finally, it's the TRC's job to guide and inspire Aboriginal people and Canadians in a process of truth and healing that will lead toward reconciliation and renewed relationships. One of the projects I just want to speak to you quickly about is the Missing Children and Burial Project. It's been identified by the TRC. It was identified early on as a project that they would support. And its aim is to examine the number and causes of deaths and illnesses and disappearances of children from the schools. The TRC is planning to carry out this project to identify and locate cemeteries and grave sites associated with each residential school. So if there is a residential school in the town that you lived in growing up, and you know where there's a grave or burial ground, please let us know. The TRC is going to review all the church records and government records, as well as information provided by survivors, staff, or anyone else to help locate these missing children.